Educational Communications and this station present Environmental Directions with Nancy Pearlman. On this series, we explore the effects of human influence on the Earth's ecosystems and discuss solutions to environmental problems which affect the quality of life on this planet. Environmental Directions gives you the kind of information you need to help you participate in decisions impacting your community, the nation, and the world. Now, here's your host, Nancy Pearlman.
Hello. For the next half hour, we are going to be talking about fly fishing and enjoying the out-of-doors, as well as protecting nature, with my guest, Ron Dungan. He is a writer and author of the book, The Worst Fishing Dog Ever, and other essays. He has been a travel and outdoors writer for the Arizona Republic for many years. He won numerous state press club awards and contributed to a Pulitzer Prize-winning story on the border. More recently, as a reporter for the public radio affiliate KJZZ, he had pieces on NPR and Here and Now. His work has appeared in the Journal of Arizona History, New Mexico Historical Review, the New York Times, Gray Sporting Journal, USA Today, Sierra, the Minneapolis Star Tribune, the Miami Herald, among others. Welcome. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
Thanks for having me.
I thoroughly enjoyed your charming book. Very short essays that made me feel as though I was out in nature with you, enjoying the out-of-doors. But you were fly fishing, and I just enjoy hiking and looking at nature. Tell us what fly fishing really is.
I think in some ways it's very similar to hiking and enjoying nature, only you sort of elevate it to this other level. I do a lot of hiking myself, and I enjoy it. But the best way I've heard it described, and I will go ahead, steal this from wherever it came from, it's out there in a million places. The difference between hiking and, say, fishing or hunting is, in one, you're observing nature, in the other, you're participating in it. In the case of fly fishing, it's catch and release. You don't really have any consequences. You're there interacting with the fish. You're there. They're basically trying not to be caught, and you're trying to catch them. It just raises it to another level.
What is the appeal of fly fishing?
To me, it's enter this physical and mental space where time just kind of stands still, and it's relaxing, it's enjoyable, you're sort of interacting with nature, and you feel like you're part of it for just a brief amount of time, which is really something special in today's world.
You write so beautifully about being outdoors. I could certainly identify with that, but I can't quite figure out why you want to fly fish. Do you find that other people wonder why you do it?
I'm not sure it can be explained. I think many people have tried, and, it's been called a pastime, a sport, a hobby, a waste of time, an obsession. It's been called all of these things. I think there's just a feeling that you get on the water when you're catching fish that you just don't get doing anything else. I don't know that anyone's ever really, truly described that feeling satisfactorily.
Is it the competitive spirit that makes you want to catch them? Because I've sat next to rivers and looked at the fish, and I don't feel like I have to catch them.
Sometimes when I'm fishing, neither do I, but it's still fun to cast. It's still fun to try. Some fish are just not catchable, either because they're not eating or they've been caught enough times that they're on to you. So I don't know that it can be competitive. I think it depends on the person, and I think it depends on the situation. Sometimes you just really get fired up and you want to catch fish. Other times, say it's the middle of January, the fish are sluggish, you better not get your hopes up too high. It's still nice just to be out there, if that makes sense, and you sort of adjust your competitiveness, if that's the right word, to the situation at hand.
I enjoyed how you talked about when you started, you didn't have a lot of money, you just threw some gear together, some old tack, and made it work. But as you developed over the years, course, the culture of fly fishing, you had to go out and buy the latest all the time and spend a lot of money, which isn't always necessary.
Yeah, I don't know if I always had the latest all the time, but I definitely got into situations where I realized I wasn't catching anything because I didn't have the right stuff. So you go through this period in the beginning where you're acquiring things, and then at some point, and it's different for everybody depending on your budget or your personality, but at some point you look around and you go, I think I've overdone it.
You often describe going out on your own, going out with a friend, but you also talked about the importance of having a guide take you to some of the places and show you how to do it. I know that I've hiked many times in many places around the world, particularly in California, where I've gone on the trail by myself, but elsewhere I found that a guide would really show me and tell me about the plants and animals that I'm looking at and give me a sense of security. It's important to have an expert along sometimes.
Yeah, sometimes it is. In fishing, if you're trying to get out on your own, especially with stream fishing, eventually, and someone told me this very early on, and I didn't quite understand what they meant. Stream fishing, you're eventually going to need a guide to show you what they call how to mend line. And that's something that's really hard to show on a lake. It's really hard to get from a book. You kind of have to have somebody there showing you exactly what that line is doing and how to compensate for the stuff that's going to mess up your fishing. But you also learn a lot on your own. So guides are expensive, but I think in some cases it's really helpful to get one, whether it's fishing or in some cases hiking. I've done canyoneering trips where you needed a guide to set ropes and that sort of thing.
You described how you would drive the pavement and find that dirt road and travel it to a very isolated spot. You didn't really want to fish where the others were fishing and playing in the rivers. But you also talked about how you already have a name for a boat that you want to get. Is it different if you're on a boat and fishing versus being on the shore?
Yeah, it is. And I think I was sort of fooling around then. I don't think I actually will ever name a boat the Rusty Bucket or the Rusty Kettle or whatever it was I was referring to. But yeah, having a boat does help, especially in lakes, especially in Arizona. And one of the things that I've noticed, I'm kind of going back to that stage where I had to acquire new gear because my kick boat eventually fell apart to the point where I was wrapping duct tape all around it. And I started thinking, maybe I don't want to be out in the water. That boat I should have named, but eventually what I wound up doing was taking it out to the trash. So yeah, I'm trying to upgrade my boat. In lakes, it can be very important to get out, especially bigger lakes, to get out where the fish are.
I was surprised that I enjoyed each and every chapter because you describe the out of doors, you describe your experience, you describe enjoying nature. You have a wonderful way with words, and I also learned some things. You describe some of the fish that you do catch and release. Trout is very important. There are two species native to the Southwest, the Apache trout, the Gila trout. What are the different fish that you do enjoy catching and releasing?
I think the short, easy answer is I like them all. I just caught a bunch of rainbow trout yesterday, and it was a lot of fun. But at the same time, I think it's really important, if you're a fisherman, to pay attention to conservation and maybe realize that the history of angling includes overrunning native species of fish. I think a lot of people would be surprised to know in Arizona, which you think of as desert, we have two species of native trout, and one is the Apache trout, and the other is the Gila trout. Now, for years, biologists thought that the Gila trout was one species. It was all these fish that they kept seeing. They had this yellowish color to them, so they were called yellow-bellied speckled trout or whatever. Up north, they have cutthroat trout, which have this red flare along the gill plate. But anyway, they eventually discovered that there were actually two species, the Gila trout and the Apache trout. And they named the Apache trout right about the time, I think it was a year before they passed the Endangered Species Act. And so I talk a little bit about that, the different species of trout we have here in a region known for its deserts, as well as the efforts to keep those populations of those fish protected. The Apache trout was recently taken off the endangered species list, so it's kind of a success story in an area where sometimes when we talk about fishing, it's stories of loss, or rivers, it's stories of loss, but this is kind of a success story.
You mentioned the Endangered Species Act, and the majority of Americans want to continue to support this act, and yet the agencies responsible for enforcing the act, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the Bureau of Land Management, are not getting the necessary funding, and the act is always being proposed to be weakened, and yet these animals and many others, plants too, need the protection that the Endangered Species Act has created, because otherwise they might go extinct. Do you think that we are going to be able to protect our native species?
I think it's a good question, and it sort of depends on what I'm reading, what I'm thinking about. On one hand, I think the Endangered Species Act, let me talk about that first. It has, in many ways, been successful. Thank God we have it. And I think that the American people support it. It turned 50 a few years ago, and I did a story on that and learned a lot. And one of the things I learned was that just about every, if not every, session of Congress, somebody tries to weaken the act, somebody in Congress. Congress, and I knew this when I started the story, Congress did a really good job of writing the act and creating it. What they didn't anticipate was it was going to apply to bugs, fish, little songbirds, and that can really have an impact on industry. And congressmen get a lot of their funds from industry. And so a lot of them almost immediately tried to backpedal, but it was too late. The act is really well written, and the American people want to see it enforced, and they want to see it remain in place. So rather than repeal the act, which they can't do, they've tried to starve the agencies that administer it, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the Bureau of Land Management. And I think to the other part of your question, at the same time, every now and then you read about something called the sixth great extinction, right? I'm sure you're familiar with that. It's kind of scary, right?
Definitely. We certainly have to save all the different plants and animals on the planet, and that means also protecting our public lands, because the public lands are about 70% of where native trout water is, and they're under attack. You've got the sagebrush rebels, the state legislators, the political action committees who want to do away with federal oversight and privatize public lands. Don't we need to keep our public lands public?
Absolutely, and I think we saw another instance where, thank God, Congress tried to test the water on that and see what would happen if they started to give up public lands, put them up for sale, privatize them. People lost their minds. Kind of makes you wonder what actually got through when that was happening, but people were very adamant that they wanted public lands left public. And I think that they still do. They will continue to support that. This has been going on for decades. The Sagebrush Rebellion, all of this is just an attempt to rewrite history. Americans do love their public lands, and we just saw where Congress tried to insert some language into a budget bill where they would, be put up for sale, and people lost their minds. So it's actually one of the bright spots if you study environmental policy, history, natural history. There are a lot of stories that are stories of loss, and this is one that has kind of a positive ring to it because people do love their public lands. It's a little off topic when the subject of maybe fishing, but you can see this with the Park Service is a really good example. We're seeing threats to the Park Service, funding cuts, that sort of thing, the same kind of cuts they've made to other agencies in the past. I think what they're trying to do, what I've heard is they're trying to do is make it look like the parks are failing. And eventually that will allow them to circle back and say, well, the answer is to privatize them. So there are all kinds of ways they sort of try to carry out these attempts to privatize public lands, and I think people will need to be really cautious and vigilant about watching over what their elected officials are doing.
What I liked about your book, The Worst Fishing Dog Ever, and other essays, is that you brought up some of these important points, but it wasn't hard-hitting. It wasn't a book that told us all the crises that we have to deal deal with and what's going on, because you put it in the context of your experience out of doors while you enjoyed fishing. We're going to talk more about some of the essays that you have provided in your book when we return in a moment with my guest, Ron Dungan, who is a writer and author. We'll be back in a moment with more ecological issues.
Environmental Directions with Nancy Pearlman continues with further discussion of the world's critical ecological issues. For more information, you may call 310-559-9160 or go to www.ecoprojects.org. Now, here's Nancy.
I'm speaking with Ron Dungan, who is a writer, reporter, author of The Worst Fishing Dog Ever and other essays. You truly must explain why you have the dog in the title when the book is mostly about fly fishing.
I think fly fishing is about a lot of different things. It's a little bit different from other types of fishing in that it's a lifestyle. It's the kind of thing, you get outdoors. Of course, you're going to bring your dog. Your dog needs to get out. You don't necessarily want to take him to this trout stream, but he can maybe wait at camp and that sort of thing. And in some cases, he will make his way to the stream, and it's a disaster. Other times, you just leave the dog at home.
Your book talks about the worst fishing dog. What makes a good fishing dog?
A good fishing dog is a dog that will just sit there, preferably at your side or behind you, and not try to help, not jump in the water, not try to eat the fish, although occasionally a little nip. Good fishing dog might do that or smell the fish or whatever. My dogs are generally higher energy. I have a friend, her name is Cinda Howard. She guides in the White Mountains. She's got a pretty good fishing dog, but even that dog will occasionally try to bite a fish that she's handling.
You've written about the environment. You've written about your love of fly fishing. You've written about going out of doors and enjoying nature. Is this book a summary of all of that?
Yeah, I think in some respects it is. But I also tried to, at the same time, look ahead, what the future of fly fishing might look like. If you turn it in a certain way and hold it up to the light, it doesn't look good. I think anytime you're getting outside, enjoying nature, whether it's hiking or fishing, whatever, you can always find something positive. And so that's what I try to do, especially at the end of the book. I really try to look at some of the threats that are coming to public lands, to fly fishing, to just being outdoors. And I think those threats are coming from a variety of places, including just the sheer number of people moving out west and on the planet in general. But at the same time, I think there are a lot of things that we can do. My understanding is a lot of times people get turned off by negative environmental messages, and so I've tried to be positive when I can in this book.
You were certainly very positive, and it was very enjoyable. We talked about the importance of protecting the wildlife, protecting the public lands. Could you describe more the environmental concern about how climate change is making the problem worse in terms of survival of the species, how our forests have become overgrown and constantly more vulnerable to wildfire, to species that destroy some of the trees like the bark beetles? In other words, the changes that are going on environmentally are affecting the wildlife. While you were not hard-hitting about those issues, you did touch those bases to let us know we have to be concerned.
Yeah, I think I hit on all the relevant points. I guess I meant to be hard-hitting without sounding like a broken record. I think we know that wildfire is a problem. I'm not sure that people understand how much of a problem. I will be outdoors. I've been outdoors, and people will tell me, build a fire. Like, they don't know how to build a fire. And I don't think they understand how wildfire works. And whenever a prescribed burn blows up, people lose their minds. They don't understand the problem or the depth of it. The irony here is, as more wildfires burn, climate change gets worse because it's throwing a bunch of carbon into the air, and it just keeps getting worse and worse and worse. And those fires are hard on fish. It's bad for watersheds. It's bad on rivers and streams. The mud and ash that gets swept away into the stream is not good for fish, not good for anything in that stream. And that's what inevitably happens in the Southwest because monsoons follow fire season. The only way out of this problem if there is a way out, there might not be, I'm not sure the best way to express this because you have to be careful, but we somehow have to examine and reevaluate our relationship with fire, because putting every fire out is not the answer. And I'm starting to see this when fires get out of control. I've seen state legislators take Forest Service employees to task because they're not fighting the fire. I literally heard a state legislator say, I want firefighters, not fire watchers. These fires are so big, you just can't go in there with a hose and a Pulaski and put it out. You have to be very strategic about how you do this. That's what they're doing. They're doing what they've always done, and they're doing a remarkable job. It's going to take a long time to get a handle on this problem. The American public could, if they want to help, maybe read a book by Stephen Pine, read a book on fire science and the history of the problem and how we got here, and start to understand this is going to take a lot of work. There might be some pain involved.
Understanding the problem is very important so that we can take solutions.
I write about a lot of things in this book that have, on the surface, nothing to do with fishing. I write about old friends who have died. I write about life, death, nature, climate change. And if you fly fish enough, eventually all these things sort of become entangled into your life in ways that are kind of hard to untangle. In some cases, it feels like I'm writing about the end of the world, right? Like endangered species, climate change, that sort of thing. I try to bring a sense of humor. If you don't have a sense of humor, you'll go crazy.
You certainly succeeded, because I've read so many nonfiction books about the environmental crisis, but yours, I felt I was reading about being outdoors and got a sense of what the crises are, but you weren't hard-hitting about it.
Well, I feel in some cases I was, but I also tried to end every essay on a positive note so that you didn't put down the book, immediately reach for the bottle.
I was looking forward to the next essay every time I put down the book, because you describe experiences on many different rivers. How many have you fished on, and what's your most favorite location? Or do you want to keep that a secret?
I don't know that I have a favorite location, and if I did, I probably would want to keep it a secret. I have no idea how many rivers I fished. I feel I go to a lot of the same ones over and over again, but I'm always looking out for new places. That's one of the really cool things about it, is you can fish in your own backyard unless you live in the desert, or you can travel miles away and try to do something new. I just saw a presentation yesterday put on by a guy who's caught 500 different species of fish. He's fished all around the world. That's a little far-reaching for me, but I do frequently think I need to get up to the Yellowstone area again sometime, in Montana and some of those places. I really like fishing the San Juan River. It's close to home in New Mexico, and southwest Colorado, because it's close as well.
You do what's called catch and release, which means that you enjoy the experience of trying to catch the fish, but you release the fish. But do you ever fish and keep the fish and eat the fish?
I have. There's actually a chapter in the book about that, and if I do the math, I think that happened like 10 years ago, the last time I caught a trout. And I keep a few smallmouth bass once in a while, but I usually let them go. A lot of people don't really understand why we do that, and I think it's because they don't understand how the fish got there in the first place. And in many cases, in today's day and age, they were stocked. They're not natural. They're not God's fish. They were put there by biologists because all the native fish went away. Or they had a lake that was made because of a reservoir project, so they want to put fish in there so people can go have fun. At the same time, one of the reasons that some of these places don't have fish is because people overfished them. And you sort of, once you start taking in all this natural history and all these moving pieces fit together, you realize if everybody kept their fish, we've got billions of people on the planet, if everyone kept their fish, there wouldn't be any.
Overfishing has definitely become a problem. You mentioned stalking. I hope that they're stalking with the native species, but I also know that in many locations, exotic species that don't belong in the area, that have come from elsewhere, have ended up in the streams and the rivers. How serious a problem is that?
I think it depends on where you're talking about, what you're talking about. You know, some places we're talking about trout never had any trout in the first place. So they're kind of an exotic. In some cases, that's okay. In some cases, it's not. I'm not sure if we can get into that. I will say one of the problems that they had early on when they realized, wow, American settlers overfishing the streams, they couldn't raise native fish to replace those populations. So like in the case of the Gila trout, they had a fishery or a hatchery in New Mexico. I want to say it was in the 20s, and they just shut it down because they weren't able to raise these fish. What they wind up doing is stocking rainbow trout in many cases, which are really resilient in hatcheries, easier to raise. And there's research, there's a book about that called An Entirely Synthetic Fish, right? This is a rubber fish. You can make this fish in a factory. And so that's why we have a lot of rainbow trout in our streams. Love rainbow trout as a fisherman. In other places, they've tried to cut back on the number of rainbows and replace them with natives. And I'm happy to report that they're way better at doing that than they were, say, in the 20s. By that, I mean the 1920s.
You referenced a book, and I do want to mention that even though this is not a technical book, you do have an appendix of so many different articles and books that you have read, and you've quoted them often in your essays, and it's very good that you let people know about other places where they can get information and find out about this experience of fly fishing. We've talked about the trout. How many fish are generally found together in a river or stream where you're out catching the trout, and what other fish do you try to catch?
Wow, that's an interesting question. Again, I just saw a presentation by an angler who targets all kinds of fish. If there's a species in the river or the lake, he wants to go after it. I don't necessarily do that. And I think as to the part of how many different species there are, it just depends. A lot of places have a limited number of fish. There might be something that feeds along the bottom and then some trout or bass, and there aren't that many fish. Other places, it's just a smorgasbord of different species. So it really depends on the environment. I think a lot of warm water places, a lot of these lakes they've created with reservoirs, they just dump fish in there. So you might find a dozen species of fish.
Your short essays have so many different experiences. You also talk about how we're often stuck in our offices and our work, but I'm quoting you, we make peace with our work, fish when we can, leave when we must. I think it's so important that people get out of the buildings, get out of the city, go out. You don't have to fish. I read this as a non-fisher, but I enjoyed finding out how you enjoyed that experience. There are so many stories that you have here, and we don't have time, so share with me one or two of your favorite experiences.
I think a couple come to mind. There are a couple places in Arizona that I really like. One of them is a quiet little stream where I like to go and backpack. There are fish in it. A lot of times what I'll do is I will fish for a little bit, and then I'll go get my pack and a dog, and we'll go downstream to this meadow. And there aren't very many fish in the stream by that meadow. The dogs can just sort of splash around, and they'll do this when I go in there. It's summer. It's a high elevation place. So they'll splash around all night, and I'll watch the stars, maybe have a fire. And it's just a really peaceful place. I've heard elk bugling in there. I've heard coyotes. It's just a really nice, peaceful place to be. And it's not that hard to get to. This other place I like to go to is lower in elevation. It's really rugged, full of bears, rattlesnakes, everything you can name in Arizona. Cactus, spiky. It's a place with a lot of sharp rock and sharp plants. At the same time, really remote. I mean, bears don't like crowded places. And so it's just a really nice place to be. And, when you finally get around to getting there, because it's a four-wheel drive adventure, to put it mildly, when you finally get in there and realize that you haven't destroyed your truck and get down to the water, usually the fish are very cooperative.
I hope everybody gets your book, The Worst Fishing Dog Ever, and other essays, because they will enjoy hearing about your journeys in over 27 short essays, into the backcountry, talking about the personal, cultural, environmental forces that surround the sport of fly fishing, as well as the sport, if we want to call it, of getting out in nature and enjoying the out of doors. It's a great book. Thank you so very much for writing some of these stories. Thank you for making it available, and thank you for being my guest.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
I have been speaking with Ron Duncan, who is a travel and outdoors writer and author of The Worst Fishing Dog Ever and other essays. I'm Nancy Pearlman. Thank you very much for joining us, and do tune in again next week.
If you would like free information about these environmental issues, go to www.ecoprojects.org or call 310-559-9160. Environmental Directions with your host, Nancy Pearlman, is a community affairs program of the nonprofit organization Educational Communications and this station.